Okay, if we needed any more proof that the housing crisis in this country is government engineered, then the IPA research I mentioned should settle the argument. In essence, the government has put university profits and providing that backdoor entry to more than 1.75 million migrants, many without skills, over Aussies being able to afford a roof over their head. Now, government loves migration because it props up their economic headline figures, but on a per capita basis, it's actually putting a lot of us in a worse position, both financially and in terms of a quality of life. The migration policy in this country has been disgraceful for quite some time, and this latest data shows just how it is now smashing opportunities for everyday Australians. Well, joining me to have a chat about this is IPA Research Fellow Saxon Davidson. Saxon, thanks for your time, mate. Given the widely recognised housing crisis, do you reckon the government is doing Aussies a disservice persisting with such high immigration rates?
The government is doing Australians a great disservice on two fronts. It is causing one problem by trying to solve another, which is worker shortages, which I'll get to in a minute, and is also exacerbating housing shortages. As you mentioned earlier, this proposed 1.7 million Australians over the next 5 years will create a housing shortage of about over 250,000 homes. And of those migrants, the international students among them are taking up, in the last financial year just passed, 70% on average nationwide of the homes that are being supplied to the labour market, leaving just, to the housing market, leaving just 30% for everyday Australians who are trying to enter the housing market and every other migrant who's also entered the country.
But Saxon, we see in some cities where they're taking up all the new stock plus some of the existing stock, and it's leaving a lot of Aussies unable to find affordable accommodation. And when you couple it with some of the government's policies, state government policies, like in your state of Victoria, they're driving housing investors out, which makes even less available for rent. This is a catastrophe that's heading for a lot of Australians, isn't it?
Absolutely. And there is a lot of appetite electorally at the moment for a change in Australia's migration policy. We released some polling just in May about Australians' attitude towards migration and infrastructure at the moment, and 60% of the respondents said that they wanted migration paused, not like reduced, but paused, like capped until infrastructure can catch up. There was similar polling recently also from The Guardian and the Sydney Morning Herald, which came up with almost the exact same results, with The Guardian showing 59% and the Sydney Morning Herald showing 60% of Australians wants migration paused.
What would that do, Saxon, to Australia's economy, though? My theory has long been that politicians love big migration because it boosts the headline figures, the GDP goes up, there's more people buying widgets. They turn a blind eye to the congestion problems, the serviceability, the access problems, the availability of some essential services, because they just sell the headline figures. So what would happen to Australia's economy if we just said, no, we're going to pause migration for a year or two or three?
Well, we'd have to create new reforms to help with our worker shortages. Big migration may increase GDP and increase the pie for every Australian, but it does not necessarily increase the slice of the pie for every Australian. Instead, we should be reducing red tape and tax barriers that prevent Australians from entering the workforce and from contributing to reduce job vacancies that are causing our worker shortages.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and it's a beautiful way of putting it. The pie may increase, but it doesn't mean we all get a little bit more of it. In fact, we're getting less of it, and the quality of life, which is very hard to measure, I think, but a lot of people sense it, diminishes. And, it could be a lower rate of growth in per capita income, or it could be there's more congestion or lack of availability of services, I mentioned. But why do you think successive governments, and I include the coalition in this, have continue to turn a blind eye to it? They pay lip service to reducing the migration intake. Is it purely economic, or do you think there's bigger thoughts, a bigger agenda at work here?
Well, because it's an easier response. It's a lazier response, and it's also short-sighted. As I mentioned earlier, big migration in this instance is causing one problem, exacerbating and causing one problem to try and solve another. When there are more cost efficient and more, it can increase the slice of the pie for everyday Australians if more Australians are able to enter the workforce.
Yeah, I agree with you, and the IPA does amazing work in this space about how we can deregulate our way to prosperity, get government out of our lives, and business will thrive, jobs will grow, and we will all be much better off as a result. Saxon, Davidson, thank you so much for your time and joining me on Bernardi tonight.